Jennifer Sanders, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Honoring Black History, and Still We Rise. Today is really about remembering the past, celebrating the present, and finding unique solutions for the future. Right now, we are in East Austin, where despite policies dating back to the 1920s have led to gentrification, people in this community are finding ways to preserve the legacy and make sure their voices are still heard.
There's a lot of memories. So on one piece it feels nostalgic, but on the other piece I'm really sad.
The street name reads East 12th, but for Terry P. Mitchell, this is Memory Lane. She's a daughter of East Austin, born and raised on this block, not too far from staples like Sam's Barbecue. Over the years, though, she's watched gentrification change the landscape of the place she once called home.
The reality is our generation let our parents and our grandparents' property go. We could have fought a little bit harder. We could have pushed back on the systems, on the city a little bit harder if we knew exactly what we had.
That rich history on display throughout the East Side. But what it doesn't show, the 1928 master plan, the city's government creating a Negro district in what's now Council District 1. The purpose, moving all of Austin's blacks into one area to save money and solve the city's desire to segregate the race.
6 Square comes from the master plan, the 1928 master plan that said that black people could only live within a 6 square radius in East Austin. And when I say that to people, they're like, oh no, that can't be true.
Pamela Benson Owens describes a dark time in the city's history as a moment where the true definition of community was a beacon of light and hope.
It was a time when in neighborhoods, you knew everybody. There were no fences up because everybody was really co-sharing in the village and helping to preserve the culture.
A legacy she's continuing through her work as CEO of 6 Square. It's an organization and cultural district dedicated to uplifting Black Austin through the arts, education, and thousands of dollars in financial support to Black creatives and small businesses during a pandemic. She's helping create a future of abundance for Black Austin.
It's about collective and collaborative growth. It's about uplifting and magnifying and amplifying the brilliance that exists in Black leadership in Austin.
Leaders like Mitchell, who is intentional about ownership and investments. One of those investments, this Black-owned yoga studio on East 12th Street. Again, not too far from her childhood home. She's also started the Black Leaders Collective. It's a think tank that develops and implements plans and policies with city leaders, all to elevate the Black community.
For me, the reason why I do it is because if we don't, who will? So I just want to be a mentor and a role model to the next generation that may not see representation in success.
Right now, we're at the city's oldest institution of higher learning and the only historically Black college or university. Now, for years, Houston Tillotson has poured so many resources into this community. And then the pandemic hit and a shift began. 145 years of history right here on Bluebonnet Hill. Baseball legend Jackie Robinson was a Samuel Houston College instructor, basketball coach, and athletic director. That was just a few years before the school merged with Tillotson College, becoming HT. Since that time, the school has awarded thousands of degrees, producing politicians, scientists, authors, and even a treasurer of the United States. That legacy continues with computer science major Joseph Mupande, who's entering the Navy. He's the current Mr. HT, tasked with representing the university throughout the year.
HT is really a family-oriented school. It's a family. You just know everybody. When that in-person aspect was taken away, it really changed.
Empty sidewalks and classrooms tell the story of a much different life on campus since all students are virtual. Fortunately, there were no COVID-19 cases on campus. The challenges were off campus: access to resources, computers, Wi-Fi, and connectivity.
We got sent tablets. Some students got Wi-Fi vouchers if they didn't have access to Wi-Fi.
Seniors like Safana Velji, a tutor, lead resident assistant, captain of the women's soccer team, saw just how devastating the impact of COVID-19 was on all students. So she launched a scholarship to help seniors with graduation fees.
I wanted to make sure that when you are receiving this scholarship, you know that you should come back, try and support HT because they've supported all of us for a very long time.
Especially during a global pandemic affecting Black and brown students and their families at a disproportionate rate. It's also threatening the sustainability of historically Black colleges and universities around the country, many of which have been completely virtual since the start of the pandemic.
By making the decision to go virtual, and this is why it was such a hard decision, we automatically lose $1.6 million for a semester from the revenues that we would have gotten from our residence halls and the cafeteria.
The university received CARES Act funding, but it didn't cover all the expenses. HT's president, Dr. Colette Pierce-Burnett, cut expenses without cutting staff and launched a COVID-19 support fund. And now the university that poured so much into the community of East Austin and beyond was getting a little help. Individuals, banks, churches, and graduates stepped up, paying balances for students and removing barriers to success.
Their role as educated people is to now go sit in those seats where the decisions are made so that they can be a part of change and be a part of moving that moral arc towards justice.
Helping students like Joseph and Safana continue a rich legacy of Houston-Tillotson University. We'll have much more after the break, but first, a Black history trivia question. He was an award-winning singer and jazz musician, but he's also the first Black American to host a show on NBC. Can you guess who it is? We'll have that answer when we return. Our trivia question before the break, he was an award-winning singer and jazz musician, but he's also the first Black American to host a show on NBC. The answer, Nat King Cole. And welcome back to Honoring Black History, and Still We Rise. Well, rising comes quite naturally to the woman you're about to meet. She's spent years working on movie sets, and with dedication, tenacity, and breaking barriers in the industry, she now has a gold statue on her shelf. You may have heard of it. It's called Oscar.
I'm a unicorn in the industry. I'm a dark-skinned Black woman. That does not exist as a production designer anywhere in the world at this level that I work.
Make that an award-winning production designer with credits ranging from Black Panther, for which she won the Oscar, to Moonlight, to Beyonce's Lemonade. But what is the job of a production designer on a movie?
And I sit down with the director and we talk about like the mood and the look and the colors, that we're going to use to portray whatever psychology.
Hannah Beekler started at the bottom of the film business after moving to New Orleans. Attracted by state tax credits, there's a thriving movie and TV production business in Louisiana, and Beekler did whatever job came along, and no task was beneath her.
Someone said I needed to clean the bathroom. I built shelves. I built shelves in there. Went out and spent my own money and bought some brooms and things, and they walked in and they're like, I just asked you to clean the bathroom. But I got another job.
It was that hustle and that perseverance at every turn that continued to elevate Beekler, from building sets to painting, until one day she decided she'd had enough experience and had learned enough to declare herself a production designer.
Nobody else knew that, but I woke up that day and decided, and I went forward with that in my head. Now I'm a production designer.
Beekler also says that the responsibility to have more people of color in production roles rests with the movie business.
As hard as the industry worked to keep minorities out, they will have to work as hard to include, because it's not charity, and oftentimes inclusion is looked at as, well, it's charity. No, it's inclusion because I deserve to be here.
Production for Black Panther 2 is underway, which will keep Beekler busy through next year. But one thing is certain, if she has any say in the matter, we will continue to see her movie touch for years to come.
I feed on the challenge because I am such that if you put it before me and say maybe you can't do it, I say maybe I can.
As many have learned, we should never doubt Hannah Beekler. In New Orleans, LBJ reporting.
And as we take a break, here's our second Black History trivia question. This famous writer who lived until the age of 86 was born to the name of Marguerite, but she was also known by a much shorter name. Put your thinking caps on. We'll have the answer coming up after the break. Our second Black History trivia question today. This famous writer who lived until the age of 86 was born to the name of Marguerite, but she was known by a much shorter name. If you guessed Maya Angelou, you got it right. Welcome back to Honoring Black History, and still we rise. When you think about the Dallas Mavericks, notable players' names might come to mind. But over in the CEO's office is the first Black woman to ever hold that position in NBA history. Here's her story.
And so my mother always, I tell people, she put two books in my hand, a math book in one hand and a Bible in the other, and said, if you keep your head in these two books, you will get out. And growing up, I didn't know exactly what out meant, but later I realized it was out of poverty.
Since family left Birmingham, Alabama when she was 3 months old, an effort to escape the Jim Crow South. But life in the Bay Area of California in the projects wasn't easy.
When I was 11 years old, some chaos broke out in our family, and I saw my father actually shoot a man in the head. He had approached our house, and my father actually had to shoot back in self-defense because I was standing on my father's right side when this young man pulled out a pistol and pointed it down to my father's right side at me.
The man survived, but Sint never forgot it. She sought a way out and set her sights on leadership. At her sister's graduation, she noticed the only speakers were white boys.
And I was in the 9th grade, and I looked at my mom and I said, can a Black girl be senior class president? She said, of course, you can do whatever you want to do.
Sint became the first African-American president at her school.
It was historic. It got a little emotional there, and I think the teachers and the faculty, they were more emotional than probably I was, but it was historic, and I guess we've been blazing trails ever since then.
Sint was the first Black cheerleader at Berkeley and the first African-American Delta Gamma at the college. Yet, even at almost 40 years old, she found herself not being accepted for who she was. When offered a position as an officer at AT&T, she initially turned it down. Her boss asked her to change everything from her hair to her verbiage.
When you fundamentally try to change who I am, when you tell me I can't say blessed, when you tell me I'm too nice to people, when you tell me I can't laugh, who matters? Black lives matter. When you tell me I'm too loud, we're having a problem here because you're actually telling me you don't want me to be the Black woman.
AT&T did reverse course, and she took the job. Now, as CEO of the Mavs, tasked with transforming the culture, she's making sure nobody else experiences that.
If nothing else, I am proud of the speak up culture that we have. Our people have a voice. The level doesn't matter. I had a one-on-one with every single person in the organization when I got there.
She encourages every company, every family to take this month to learn about the significance of the contributions Black people have made to this country. In Dallas, Jenny Anchondo reporting.
Our next Black History question today. He attained a degree in cultural geography in 1986, but this superstar who was born in Brooklyn, New York, took flight in a much different industry. Find out who it is after the break. Did you guess our last trivia question correctly? He attained a degree in cultural geography in 1986, but this superstar, who was born in Brooklyn, New York, took flight in a much different industry. It's 6-time NBA champion Michael Jordan, who celebrates his 58th birthday this month. There's a rich piece of history tucked away less than an hour outside of Houston in Rosenberg, the Black Cowboy Museum. Maggie Flecknoe shares the story of the true Black cowboy.
Ever since I was 3 years old, I've always wanted to be a cowboy.
Larry Callis's cowboy roots run deep. He comes from a full line of cowboys in El Campo, Texas, and started working on a ranch with his father at the age of 9. Callis went on to ride in the rodeo. Callis says 4 years ago, God spoke to him and told him to open the museum to celebrate the unsung black cowboys in his life. So Callis took his life savings and opened the first and only black cowboy museum in the world, a hidden part of history located right outside of Houston in Rosenberg.
I like history, and what I like to do is teach people history. And that's why I started this museum.
And now this cowboy is educating everyone about what it truly means to be a cowboy, with artifacts dating back over 200 years. When you visit the Black Cowboy Museum, you walk away with so much. But the most important lesson, Callis says, is one his father taught him, to be honest.
He said, if you tell the truth, everybody's gonna find out.
And now, thanks to Callis, the truth is out about the black cowboy.
Our final Black History trivia question. He owns one of the most coveted voices in Hollywood, but he lived as a mute in his childhood. Can you guess which force of an actor we're talking about? The answer when we return. Did you solve our final trivia question? He owns one of the most coveted voices in Hollywood, but he lived as a mute in his childhood. The man who conquered stuttering as a child and became a silver screen legend is James Earl Jones. Welcome back. We're ending our program where I usually start my day, here at the KXAN News Studios on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The past year will not only be remembered for the coronavirus pandemic, it was a monumental year, good and bad, for race relations in the U.S. From the first day on the calendar to the last, 2020 changed Black history forever. 2020. In future decades, it will undoubtedly be remembered in infamy. We have the emergence of the coronavirus to thank for that. But in the midst of what has become, and still is, a global problem, a seed of progress sprouted here in the United States. A social justice movement sprung nationwide, triggered by one man's death in Minnesota. Before that, though, some moments of note, starting back in January. On the 26th, the sports world sadly said goodbye to Kobe Bryant, who died in a helicopter crash at the age of 41. His 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, along with several other passengers, were also killed in that crash. Bryant's death was mourned around the world, even here in Austin, with a painted mural. In February, Texas-born Patrick Mahomes became just the third black quarterback to win the Super Bowl. His Kansas City Chiefs defeated the San Francisco 49ers on February 2nd, fittingly, during Black History Month. And in March, as the world was put on notice of the coronavirus pandemic, 26-year-old Breonna Taylor was shot and killed by police in her Louisville apartment. In April, former President Barack Obama officially endorses the former Vice President Joe Biden, who would go on to win the 2020 presidential election. And in May, the video-recorded death of George Floyd, as we mentioned earlier, started the largest U.S. social justice movement in recent history. While in police custody, Floyd passed away after an officer knelt on his neck for more than 8 minutes. And nationwide protests soon followed, including right here in Austin, throughout the spring and throughout the summer. That moment changed the course of Black history in the United States. In June, Rayshard Brooks was gunned down by police after a struggle in a Wendy's parking lot. Protesters and rioters didn't take long to gather and burn the restaurant to the ground during the swell of the Black Lives Matter movement. July marked the death of John Lewis. The civil rights activist and Georgia congressman was one of the organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. And August marked the death of Black Panther star Chadwick Boseman after a silent battle with colon cancer. He was diagnosed back in 2016. In that same month, 29-year-old Jacob Blake was gunned down by police in Wisconsin while 3 of his children stood by inside his SUV. Blake's death extended the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Election Day was in November, And Kamala Harris became not only the first woman to be elected vice president, but the first woman of color to do so. And finally, in December, as the coronavirus pandemic continued to harshly impact Black communities around the country, the rollout of vaccines emerged, which brings us to now, 2020. A year we all will remember for years to come as a benchmark for not only Black history, but American history. Here's hoping we learn from that history right now in 2021. Thank you for watching. Good night.